Part 14. All right, let's look at Isaiah 7:14 as well as Isaiah 9:1-7, which say something to the effect of, "Therefore, Jehovah himself gives you a sign. Look, the Alma conceives and gives birth to a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." And then the Isaiah 9 reference is, "For a child is born unto us, a son is given unto us, and the rule is on his shoulders, and his name is called Wonderful Counselor, Strong God, Father of continuity." I'm messing that up. And Prince of Peace. All right. So if you're a messianic reader, no doubt you see these two verses and cannot think about anyone else but Jesus, because these are read year round, year after year around Christmas, and so of course, who do we associate them with other than Jesus? But my non-messianic reader here reads these two verses and says, you cannot possibly understand the meaning without the surrounding text. So in these passages, let's take a Paul Harvey approach and find out the rest of the story. Yeah, that was corny. Okay, before we look at the context, I wanted to address an issue that I never knew was an issue because I obviously don't speak Hebrew. And in Hebrew, there's a word that describes a young female, and that word would be Alma. And another word that would describe a young lady when her sexual history is being addressed, and that word would be Betula. So when a passage is concerned about a female's physical sexual status, in the Hebrew, the word Betula would be used. When we're wanting to describe a female who happens to be of a youthful age, who's a female, then we get the word Alma. And of course, the masculine form of Alma would be Elam. When the scriptures describe a young man, but obviously isn't interested in his sexual status, that word Elam would be used. And we see this from 1 Samuel 17:56, as well as 1 Samuel 20, verse 22. So the feminine version, Alma, is here to let the reader know that this is a female of youthful age. Go to Israel right now and ask it. That wasn't a command, by the way. It sounded like it. Go to Israel right now. Go to Israel right now and ask a native speaker what the word is for virgin. And 100% of the time you would get the response of Betula. Sure, some young females are virgins. However, in the Hebrew, that's not the point of having two different words. Having two different words in Hebrew is to be able to note the difference. If one is concerned about her sexual history, the word Betula will always be used. A native speaker will hold true to these words and their meanings. The counter-argument that I've heard looking at pro-messianic sources for this on the words difference is that Alma just doesn't always talk about a virgin and I just need to take their word for it. Seriously, that was pretty much the answer I got, was just take our word for it. It doesn't always mean virgin or a young lady. Let's see. And of course I lost my spot. Okay, so the example given for that concept, and which I continue to write, the only passage with the supposed example is found in Joel 1, verse 8, which says, "Wail like a maiden," or Betula, which would be a physical virgin. So wail like a physical virgin, girded with sackcloth for the husband of her youth. Well, the argument is, how can a virgin have a husband? Well, here's why. In ancient times, when a woman was engaged to a man, at that point of the engagement, it was already considered as though she was married to him. Thus, at that contract of the engagement, he is considered to be her husband. However, they have not come together in any kind of sexual union yet, and that usually lasts a year, that engagement. If they broke off the engagement, however, a certificate of divorce must have been given, and even though they had not come together sexually and it was just an engagement, it was just as binding of a contract. And this is much different from today's times. So it is possible for a woman to have a husband yet still be a virgin because through that year-long engagement, they had not come together yet to live as one. At the time of the engagement is when she would have been able to call him a husband. Although the official ceremony had not taken place yet, and usually took about a year to get to that point. So when you read the whole chapter, ding, 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 context, go read the whole chapter of Joel, it becomes obvious that he is speaking about how the inhabitants of Israel have slacked off, and because of it, others have taken their goods. Others have come and stolen what belonged to them. So basically, what belongs to them has been taken, and being portrayed in this verse here in Joel 1:8 is the idea of the true mourning that would take place if the engaged virgin had her husband ripped away from her before they could have even come together in marriage and in unity as husband and wife. So this is really a weak argument to make that the word betula and alma can be interchangeable, and that's what I see on the pro-messianic sources regarding this. You cannot, they can't be interchangeable, and you can't morph it to fit your agenda. You just can't do that. You can, but it's not honest. This verse from Joel is the only one that I have found from a messianic point that makes the claim that this word betula is not always accurate, and you don't see this anywhere else. And as I can see, however, looking at the context and understanding the formal system of marriage in their day, it does make sense and stays true to the meaning of either being called a young woman or a virgin. So Joel 1:8 does not prove anything for the messianic aspect of this issue when you understand how things were done back then when this was written. So to be intellectually honest with the text in Isaiah 7:14, it does not say a virgin will conceive. It says a female of youthful status shall conceive. If Isaiah wanted us to know a virgin would conceive, the word betula would have been written. However, the word inserted here is alma. It also says his name will be Emmanuel. So I remember having this weird light bulb moment probably a year and a half ago. And one evening I was thinking about this particular verse, and I thought, if this is about Jesus, why didn't they call him Emmanuel? I don't know. It was just a thought. So the two verses I listed for this section from Isaiah 7 and Isaiah 9 all go together, so that's why I'm kind of doing these at the same time. But let's go back to see what's taking place at this time. So here's two questions to ask about Isaiah chapter 7. One, who was speaking about the sign in Isaiah 7:14? And are you sure it was about a virgin birth, or was the sign something else? Are you positive? Would you stake your life on it? Okay, so are we sure sorry, let me go back. This is really like three questions, so I guess I'll make this three questions. So who is speaking about the sign? Are we sure the sign was about the virgin birth, alleged virgin birth, or was it about something else? And then also, who was the sign for? And to ask that last question, who was the sign for? Not too long ago, I couldn't have even begun to answer that question without thinking it was, I don't know, Jesus, I guess. But in the context of this passage, though, who is this about, and who was to see the sign? So let's Paul Harvey this. What is going on in these chapters? If you haven't read chapters 7 through 9, I would encourage you to stop and do so before coming back. I won't be typing down everything here or speaking everything here, so I hope you'll have a better understanding of what I'm speaking about, so that what I am speaking about kind of makes sense. All right, so at the beginning of chapter 7, we have Ahaz who's ruling over the house of Judah. At this point, the house of Israel and the house of Judah are two different, it's a divided kingdom right now. Israel inhabits the northern side, and Judah inhabits the southern side. So there's a sort of civil war that's taking place against the house of Judah by the house of Israel at this time. So the house of Israel, whom at this time was definitely not living according to Yehovah and had become corrupt, had made an alliance with Syria to come and attack Judah, to tear it apart and to take it for themselves. However, Yehovah said that this will not happen, that they would not prevail against Judah. Ahaz, however, is not handling this crisis well because he knows that he doesn't even have the strength of the army like the surrounding kings and Israel would have against him, coming at him together. So Ahaz is not believing that they could be successful. In verse 11 of chapter 7, Yehovah tells Ahaz, "Ask for a sign," and it's a way of assuring him that what he has spoken is true. And Ahaz has a very humble reply, in my opinion. he says that he should not try Yehovah to ask for a sign. However, since Yehovah has granted him a sign for his belief, he goes ahead and gives Ahaz a sign. In verse 14, he tells Ahaz that the young woman has, as in past, conceived and will give birth to a son, and that before this child he has spoken of knows to refuse evil and choose the good, that the land he is dreading will be forsaken by its kings. In other words, the actual sign is that when this child is born and has come to the age to where he knows the difference between right and wrong, that this whole issue that he's facing right now with the surrounding kings, it'll be resolved. So this is the answer to the number 3 on our list above. Traditionally, in messianic circles, the sign is interpreted as the fact that it is a virgin that will conceive, and that the virgin conceiving is the sign. Well, we know already that it's not a virgin here being spoken of, and and honestly, what is so significant about females having a baby anyways? Females have babies every day, of course. So the sign given to Ahaz was not that a female will have a baby, but that by the time this child is a few years old, give or take, the armies that are trying to prevail against him will have been defeated and vanquished. In the Hebrew translation of this verse, it does not say a young female will conceive, but rather the young female will conceive. It is widely thought that because the word the comes before the word Alma, the young woman, that this is referring to someone Ahaz knows. And we could probably conclude that most likely that's his wife. This is a common way in the Hebrew language when speaking with someone who already knows what we're talking about. So you would say the so-and-so because whom you're talking to already knows who you're talking about. Also, the verse is in the context of the past tense. So Yehovah is telling Ahaz that the young lady has already conceived. The sign is about the child's age, not about the sexual status of the female whom born the child. Interesting. Okay, so what can we collect from this passage? Let's answer those questions. 1, who was the sign? Who was speaking about the sign? And who gave the sign? That would be Yehovah. And who was the sign for? Well, the sign was for Ahaz. And what exactly was the sign? That the war would be over before the child knows the difference between what is good and what is evil. So basically, a few years? Something like that. It would be interesting here to try to plug Jesus into this context. If Ahaz is stressing out over surrounding kings who are trying to overthrow Judah, why would Yehovah give him a sign about someone who is yet to exist for some 700 years later to show him that the surrounding kings wouldn't be able to dethrone him? You know what I mean? What good would that do, and what relevance did it have at that point in time with Ahab and what he was facing? Think back to every sign Yehovah ever gave his people. Think about the plagues in Egypt, the burning bush. Think about Sinai and the visible wonders he always did to prove his faithfulness. Every sign he ever gave anyone was something that could be witnessed by the people. That's the point of a sign, something you can see. Someone's virginity is not a sign. It's not a visible sign. Okay, let's not get technical, but you know where I'm going with this. If I'm in line at Walmart, I can't spot a virgin in the bustle of people that are coming and going, you know what I mean? Like, you can't spot a virgin out of a crowd. Did Mary carry around a gynecological certificate of her virginity during her pregnancy? I mean, if there was to be a sign, Yehovah definitely broke his streak and did not make it a visible one with that one. The point of signs are to strengthen our faith through what we can witness and not take someone else's word for. And all we've been given is Mary's word for it, and no others to witness her experience talking with some kind of angel or being or whoever she talked to. And this is what baffles me so much about the Matthew chapter 1, which quotes Isaiah about this verse, that Mary was the virgin who conceived. The Greek word used in the New Testament is the Greek word for a physical virgin. Yet we see that in the Hebrew, this is definitely misquoting it. And I won't lie, the issue between the Tanakh and the Gospel writing in Matthew is, to me, very bothersome. Yet at the end of the day, how can a Greek mistranslation supersede the truth of the Hebrew language? The writer of the Gospel of Matthew really gets this line from Isaiah 7:14 out of context. Was it supposed to be a type and shadow? Was it supposed to be an allegorical issue? Perhaps Matthew himself was also just having to take Mary's word for it without any witnesses to back it up. And if we say that Jesus was a fulfillment of being from a virgin birth, and also concede that there might have been a virgin birth going on in Isaiah, then really Jesus isn't special and there have been 2 virgin births. You know what I mean? So there start to be many loopholes and weird conspiracy whiteboard moments in some secret basement you have to start coming up with in order to get a virgin birth equaling Jesus out of this Isaiah passage. When you try to insert Jesus into it, it really complicates Isaiah 7. Have you ever heard of Occam's razor? It's the problem-solving... Let me start that over. All right, Occam's razor. It's the problem-solving principle that states that the simplest solution tends to be the right one. It is said that when presented with 2 competing hypotheses to solve a problem, that one should often, well, the most logical, should select the solution with the fewest assumptions. It is usually the one with the fewest assumptions that is the correct answer when there are those 2 competing hypotheses. In the case here with Isaiah 7, amongst all the other messianic prophecies I have looked at, the simple answer is always the answer that keeps the passage in context. That's always the simple answer. Here again, in context, we see that Yehovah gave Ahaz a sign of a child who was already conceived and who would not be very old before the war between kingdoms would come to an end. That's pretty simple. The competing hypothesis requires you to go to the basement, pull out the conspiracy board, and connect the dots. Phrases and ideas, all without a clear answer. It's exhausting. Why the Matthew author uses this verse to try to prove something about Mary, I cannot answer, but it is very unsettling. Why? It's unsettling to me because the very Gospels I used to put my faith in are showing that they do not have a grounded understanding of the Tanakh or the Hebrew language. And that is scary to me. The mistranslation or misperception of the Greek Gospel cannot supersede the truth of what is written in the Tanakh. Let me say that again. The mistranslation or misconception of the Greek Gospel cannot supersede the truth of what is written in the Tanakh. When we start with believing in the New Testament, then try to fit that into the Tanakh, we end up with problems, and that's what's happening here in this passage in Isaiah. We have to read the New Testament, believe it, therefore we have to now contort the Hebrew text in order for that to work with our beliefs that we already believe in. We now have to twist Hebrew in order for it to not disagree with us in our beliefs that we got from somewhere else, instead of us just reading the Hebrew. Like I've mentioned before, in Christianity, we start from the back of the book and let that interpret the front of the book, instead of having the foundation of the Tanakh and seeing where the flaws lie with everything else. We slowly start down a path to creating something in our image so we don't have to look at the possibility that we could be wrong in our lifelong beliefs. It's too painful. Look, I understand. In psychology, it's well known that the brain is fascinating. The human brain is hardwired to look for meaning in life and for ourselves. And when we find meaning, we are seriously biased towards that meaning our mind has made, and we would almost be more willing to fight it to our graves than to have to let it go. Even if we see evidence that contradicts the meaning we've held on to for so long, the mind would rather ignore the truth and would rather keep on believing the created meaning anyways. I don't think we realize how much we fight our own mind and aren't even aware of it. So many people have started their faith with Jesus, and that has given them a sense of meaning and purpose. The brain will be hardwired to fight not losing that meaning, even when the evidence presented itself against this. And this is why millions of people in other religions won't give up their false religions either. They've found meaning in them, and therefore, to that person on an individual basis, it's truth to them. It's a meaning they won't easily let go of, even if it is wrong. Perhaps we have wrapped too tightly our identity in our meanings and experiences in life. That's a question. Jesus directly threatens our identity. And at the end of the day, doesn't our identity lie with Yehovah? And luckily, he never changes. When we start with him, Yehovah, and are willing to let everything else go, perhaps that's when we can train ourselves to not let our mind rule our lives with its own bias. Do we really realize just how out of control we are of ourselves? We let our minds rule us way too easily and don't even realize it. Psychology, man, it's nuts. My opinion, this is my opinion, is that someone who can at least look at differing views and consider it, but not necessarily accept it, is a person who's not ruled by their emotions, experiences, or personal bias. Because if we never get outside of ourselves, if we never look outside our biased comfort zone and consider a different point, then our mind has us imprisoned and we don't even realize it. If we can't get outside of ourselves, we can never see if what we believe is actually right or wrong. And I think that is what our mind is protecting us from. Our mind wants to pat our little egos and little emotions. Our mind protects us from the sting of pain in a manner of self-preservation. Our mind treats us like these soft little snowflakes. Perhaps we are. As Aristotle put it, it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. So that judge sitting in the judgment seat in the court case has to go outside of himself to entertain the possibility of any outcome regardless of his bias. And we all have bias, unfortunately. We cannot let the meaning we've created for ourselves blind us to truth. Okay, so let's move on to the chapter 9 reference, which says, "For a child has been born unto us, a son has been given unto us, and the rule is on his shoulders. And his name is called Wonderful Counselor, Strong God, Father of Continuity, Prince of Peace." Okay, so like I said, I'm discussing these passages together because they kind of go together. And this is a continuation from chapter 7 of Isaiah with what is still happening with Ahaz. But before going into this verse, let me back up to Isaiah chapter 8, verse 3, and hopefully you read. But this verse talks about another instance where a prophetess conceived and bore a son. And he was to be named Maher-shalal-Hashbaz. It is said also that before he knows to cry mother and father, the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Shamaron is taken away before the king of Ashur, which, if you remember from chapter 7, is one of the kings who was coming against Ahaz. And so far now, there have been now 2 different children spoken about that will be signs to Ahaz, that by the time they're, toddler age, the war will be over. Verse 18 from chapter 8 clarifies this point. It says that the children, not child, but the children have been given for signs and wonders. So Isaiah chapter 9 begins with the assurance that Yehovah will do just as he promised to do, which is to resolve the turmoil that is coming against Judah. Ahaz is told that he will break the yoke of burden and the rod of those oppressing him, as in the days of Midian. And then in verse 6, it's announced that this child who is to be the sign has been born, past tense. So I firstly note that there are 2 different children being prophesied as a sign for Ahaz. The one from chapter 8 called Maher-shalal-Hashbaz, and the one who was conceived by a woman who we could presume Ahaz knows, probably his wife. Secondly, I note that these verses actually are in the past tense, meaning that the announcement is that they've happened. The child has been born unto them. And this is not written in any way futuristic. It's written in the past. Now, if we literally say that Jesus' name is all the things given in the verses, such as Wonderful Counselor, Strong God, Prince of Peace, etc., I find it curious that Jesus was never called any of these things in the New Testament. Have you ever thought about that? I can't find a place where Jesus is referred to any of these names in the New Testament. But the point is whenever a name is given, it's to tell you something about God, not to say that the person is God. Even altars were named something that had to do with God. In Exodus 17:15, the name given to an altar built by Moses was called Yehovah Nisi, which means Yehovah my banner. Yet we don't expect the altar of Yehovah to be Yehovah himself or a part of him, but it's rather to tell us something about the nature of Yehovah. And do you remember when Gideon names an altar, Yehovah is my peace, in Judges 6:24? Does this mean that God was in the altar somehow? Or again, does the name intend to reflect something about his nature? And it's the same with all human names given, in that are Hebrew. The name Daniel means God is judge. The name Ezekiel means God gives strength. The name Isaiah means salvation of Yehovah. And the name Nehemiah means God comforts. The list could go on, but the point is that when a name is given, it's to reflect something about God in the name. Now, this does not mean these people with a name about God are somehow embodying him. A name is given to tell you something about God, not to say that the person is God. So verse 7 of this chapter usually renders in English, and I quote, "Of the increase of his rule and peace, there is no end upon the throne of David and over his reign," end quote. In the Hebrew, the word his is actually not in the verse, so it does change the reading a little bit. So first we're told that the Son has already been born, and that his character reflects the attributes of the Father. And on that note, shouldn't we all? Then it says, rendered in Hebrew, "Of the increase of dominion and peace there is no end, and upon the throne of David and over his reign, to establish it and sustain it with right ruling and with righteousness from now on, even forever." The Ardor of Yehovah of hosts does this. So can we pick this verse apart to make it about Jesus? Well, sure. You could really make anything about anyone when you isolate a few lines. However, looking at the context of these chapters are about, we do see a clear image of what is taking place and what is going on in this time. We also see that this is in the past context. Now, could we project it forward to a prophetic past kind of prophecy? Well, sure. Actually, let's see who was being prophesied here very clearly. We know that the child born was most likely Hezekiah. And King Hezekiah was the son of Ahaz. And Ahaz goes on to fulfill the prophecies listed in verse 6 and 7 of this chapter. So the surrounding nations were conquered as prophesied through the sign of the age of the children. Hezekiah was righteous and was finally a king who ruled rightly. His glory and rule did increase throughout the entirety of his life, and this is recorded in 2 Chronicles chapter 32 as well as in Isaiah chapters 36 through 38. I think a sticking point for some people might be the word forever used here in this verse 7 when it says his reign will be forever, or something to that extent. I don't have it right in front of me, sorry. But you know what I mean. The word forever in Hebrew does literally mean forever, so some could pick this apart to mean, well, this wasn't talking about a man, it has to be Jesus, because he'll be the one to have to rule forever, right? But I will challenge you on that, because as a side note, is it not Yehovah that rules forever? After all, Zechariah 14:9 says that in the end it is Yehovah who will become king over all the earth, Yehovah in his name alone. Did you catch the last part? Yehovah in his name alone that will rule. No other name joined to him. I mean, that kind of sounds like it means what it says, that Yehovah will rule forever, not anyone named Jesus. So if we were to say this verse in Isaiah means that it is Jesus who will have rule forever, then it definitely clashes with the clarity the in the light passages found in Zechariah. It gets messy and conspiracy board-like when you try to explain it away as, Jesus and God, they're the same person, or Jesus is a part of God, so then it kind of fits. Like I've said before, I see now how necessity is the mother of invention. When you look at Scripture plainly to understand what it says, you don't need to invent any extra biblical concepts formed in the mind of men to try to make things work. But I digress. All right, the Hebrew word for forever is olam, and truly olam does mean that it'll continue forever, as long as it's possible for it to be a forever thing. So at death, a man who rules in righteousness has served the fulfillment of serving righteously forever, as long as he is alive. Still don't believe me? Don't take my word for it. This is the Hebraic way of looking at it. So to give you an example, in Exodus 21:6, it is instructed that when a servant decides to stay with his master, even after he's allowed to go free, then he can stay. He'll have the owl pierced through his ear. Owl, I can't say that right. Anyways, he gets his ear pierced, and it says that he will serve his master forever. Now, if humans are mortal, how can this servant serve his master forever? It's because forever means that it will continue so long as it's humanly possible. Until death, that's kind of the end of the ability to do something forever. I often tell my son that I'll love him forever. Truly, I will. Until the day I die, I will love him forever. Am I lying? No. Leviticus 25:46 also describes taking possession over servants forever. Now, obviously, once the servants are dead, the term forever does not apply because it's come to its end point. So the same thing was true for King Hezekiah. This is a common Hebrew way of looking at it. The rule was put on his shoulders, and he did turn it for good, with right ruling, and ruled with righteousness forever until the day of his death. Hezekiah was the boy whom was born from the young woman, whom was a sign that when he was just a few years old, the worries Ahaz was facing would be resolved. And guess what? It was. Hezekiah was the boy whom would be the next king, whom would rule with righteousness so long as he lived. And he did all those things, as it was said in these chapters of Isaiah. So at the end of the day, are these verses from Isaiah chapter 7 and 9 intended to foretell about someone who would come 700 years later? How would this have remotely helped Ahaz? It's a stretch and extremely subjective at best. Nothing in these passages are clear and consistent about being about Jesus, because the context is mingled greatly in order to put Jesus into them. And on the flip side, we do have a clear fulfillment text about who this was clearly about already. So, that's my thoughts on Isaiah 7 and 9. That's the end of this section.